Now, there has been a lot of heated reaction on both sides of this, and there are still a lot of questions. Congressman Zach Nunn represents Iowa's 3rd congressional district, which includes Des Moines. He wrote a letter to the Department of Homeland Security calling for clarity after Robert's shocking arrest. Representative Nunn joins us this morning. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Amanda, thank you for allowing us to join this conversation. I think first and foremost, Iowans deserve to have facts in this case, and it means that we have to get after the root causes that establish this. There's a couple of things that we know. There was clearly a colossal failure that allowed someone who didn't have a legal immigration status in the United States to be here leading one of the largest school districts in the country. It also is challenging that in this case, the individual didn't ever tell the school board, didn't tell the state, and didn't tell the community in a position of trust what had happened. We know that the immigration system in the United States needs reform. It's one of the things that I've led on. I'm proud that, for 800 Iowans in the 3rd district, they've come to my office and we've helped them through a very arduous immigration process, and we've had a lot of success with those folks. This is not one of those cases. This is a case where someone intentionally withheld information, and a Biden-era removal order from 2024 ended up being a situation where the school district here in our community have now been left with the aftermath of this lack of information. So holding everyone from the school, which I believe the state is doing now, up to ICE agents and the Department of Homeland Security accountable for providing clear information is something that we are absolutely committed to, both in our role in oversight, but in holding transparency so that Iowans know the truth and that we don't have this happen again.
Right. There are a lot of things that we are records, court documents that we're trying to get answers on. I know that you have requested all the documents relating to Robert's immigration status.
That's right.
Right now the timeline on when he entered the country and his citizenship status remains unclear. His citizenship status when he was hired as superintendent remains unclear. Should ICE have released that information when it made its initial public statement about Robert's arrest?
Well, this is why we immediately moved forward with an official oversight inquiry into ICE on how this happened. I expect the Department of Homeland Security to provide that information to our community, both when he came in, if there was a previous gun issue that has been discussed in 2020, as well as when was that final execution order to say he needs to be removed from the country. It was clear that under the Biden administration, they felt that his appeal, nearly a 25-year process, had expired, and he was informed that he needed to leave. At what point did he know that? And why did he fail to tell our community that he had been asked to leave the country?
Is there a legal requirement for DHS to have notified the district that a deportation order was given in 2024?
Whether there's a legal requirement or not, they absolutely should be doing this. And this is one of the areas that I think is very challenging. As we go forward right now, if ICE is going to be operating in our community, candidly, with our Department of Public Safety, our community should be part of this conversation. Now, that also means upholding the law. It doesn't mean that you get to hide behind that as an excuse to not tell your employer, to tell your community that you've been operating in the country in a non-legal status. So we'll be holding the federal government accountable for this, and I think, candidly, Iowans across the board on either side want to know that our law enforcement is something we support, is something that we can trust. Transparency is the best way to be able to do this, and making sure that ICE is providing those documents is what I intend to do, as well as work with our state and local leaders here to make sure that Des Moines Public Schools is providing, I think, the key question here: where was this I-9 that identified whether he was a U.S. citizen or not? How did he have a weapon if he was not a U.S. citizen? And why did he run from law enforcement to begin with?
There are so many questions here. Also, on that verification process, on the I-9, on the background check, the district says, they did a comprehensive background check and that he passed it. They said that when he was going through the hiring process, there were no red flags that popped up to indicate that he was not a U.S. citizen, which I think has a lot of people wondering across our state, potentially across our country, are there gaps in the vetting process? Is there anything, action that needs to be taken to ensure that this situation isn't happening in other places?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right here. Look, if the individual in question here committed perjury and lied on the I-9, if there was fraud committed, these are all things we want to be able to go after. We know this. 10 million illegal immigrants came in the last 4 years, and we want to make sure that people who want to come to this country legally and have a pathway aren't being subverted by resources going to have to do this level of enforcement on people who knowingly should not be here. At the same time, this level of follow-up from the federal government needs to ensure that we're using our community partners to make sure we're holding folks not only accountable at the employer level as well as the employee level. I want to have a pathway that we are already working on, and I'm meeting with the White House on this, to say we've got to have a better immigration system. Now that we are securing our border, now that we have some of the lowest illegal border crossings in our nation's history, let's get to a pathway where we're providing people who want to come here, candidly, people that we need to have in our community, a clean pathway to do this, so this type of bureaucratic red tape isn't something that trips someone up, and worse, isn't the type of thing that allows an illegal to stay in our country and potentially be a harm.
Again, and I want to make this clear, there are still a lot of things that we don't know.
That's right.
However, I mean, Dr. Roberts was someone who was well respected in the community. This, I think, has shocked the country just because of the high profile nature of this detainment. From your perspective, how does this fit into the overall pattern of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement strategy right now?
Well, let's not be unempathetic here. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I've worked with Dr. Roberts, but I've also worked with a lot of immigrants who are trying to come here the right way. Each of them have very powerful stories of what they want to bring to our community. But I know this, when you break the law, when you run from law enforcement, the things that we know are true are that he was not here legally, that he had been informed that he was supposed to leave, and that he didn't tell our community the truth about that. And that is both heartbreaking, but it's also a reality that we can't allow that type of behavior to be rewarded while people are trying to come here the right way and are not being treated the same way. I think what we have tried to do with the passage of real border security here is to crack down on the illegal pathways and look to build a legal pathway for folks who want to continue to come and expand. That's what we've been able to do.
Sorry to stop you there, but we got to go to break.